Blue Lock's England game is possibly the most important match so far. If they lose, they'll be eliminated from the World Cup, Ego will lose his job, and worst of all, Itoshi Sai will be stuck on the couch. The stakes have never been higher, and against one of the most well-put-together team in the series, with a new Gen 11 that's already scored, how exactly does Blue Lock beat England? Well, with this game being a battle of Ego's philosophy and Fox's philosophy, I think one more philosophy will end up overtaking both. Of course, I'm talking about Isagi Yoichi. Coming off of a loss against France, losing his central world to Karasu, and at an all-time high in terms of motivation, the Rebel is being tested this game to see if he can truly become someone new again. But as someone who constantly adapts though, seeing a new version of Isagi we have never seen before in this manga, what possibly could that even look like? Which is why I'll be going over what I think will happen to Isagi, how the god of football might be involved, different chemical reactions he'll be using this match, as he once again reminds us who the main character of the story truly is. Firstly, we need to figure out what actually is Isagi's awakening in order to see how it will affect the game. Now, leading up to the England match, there hasn't been too much context in our faces, besides Isagi saying he wants to become someone new again, but let's be honest, that's super vague. However, if we look back, there have been many clues spread throughout the story, which I think has been building up towards Isagi's England awakening. In the NEL, after Noel uses Isagi, he tells him that he will bring a theory to surpass him. In Nigeria, he says Ego's theory is not enough for him anymore, and even after the game, he says it straight to his face. The next piece of evidence comes from the France game, where we see others are starting to question Ego's methods, including Isagi himself starting to have doubts. Also, keep in mind, during the France game, it was specifically Isagi saying he was the one doing it for Blue Lock. And then when you bring all those bits and pieces of evidence into the theme of the England game and Isagi's current state right now, it all makes sense. England is a team that has zero ego. Teddy embodies that fully. In fact, that was his introduction. You can't get more obvious than that. This applies to everyone with the sole exception of Agi, but you can still see how a new philosophy has surprised Isagi and left him unable to devour anyone. And in the game itself, Isagi at the start of chapter 356 is cocky, thinking that an egoless team can't beat them because as far as he's understood, under the Blue Lock philosophy, you need an ego in order to survive. But Teddy proves him wrong by scoring in the first few minutes, which makes Isagi question how are they this good with no ego. This realization right here, as well as everything that I just talked about, points towards Isagi's next evolution. And that is, Isagi will abandon the Blue Lock philosophy, focusing on his own philosophy and playing for himself, his ego becoming just Isagi Yoichi. Remember that Isagi literally states he will create a new theory to surpass Noel Noah. He also states that Ego's football is not enough for him anymore, so eventually he needs to create something to surpass both of them, and I think the perfect time for that is right now. And the most damning evidence of all came from Teddy before the match even started, when he said, without Blue Lock, you'd be just Isagi Yoichi. Now, I'm gonna be honest, when we first heard this from Teddy, none of us knew what it meant, but I think this is a crucial line of dialogue that Kaneshiro just tried to play off as a joke. Right before this, Isagi refers to himself as Blue Lock's Isagi Yoichi, attaching his identity to Blue Lock. And again, other games, specifically the last France game, has been building up to this. Isagi saying he's doing it for the sake of Blue Lock. He was too fixated on the #1 title of Blue Lock. Everything was for Blue Lock. And I feel like as fans, we've been wanting this for a while. This is truly how we get the best version of Isagi when he gets rid of these labels, focusing on only his self-worth and his own identity, a true egoist. By doing so, he can either spark up chemical reactions with others since he is no longer useless like the France game, or he can force England to adapt and evolve, giving him someone to devour. It's kind of funny and ironic how Isagi focusing on himself brings out the best for everyone else. It benefits the team. I'll get into chemical reactions later, but we still have the question of Ego and Fox's philosophy on this game. It seems there is a focus on whoever's philosophy is right between the two will end up winning this game, but when you throw in Isagi's awakening and philosophy, it changes everything. With Isagi's evolution and bringing a new philosophy to the field, that will be the one that reigns supreme. Not Ego and not Fox, but Isagi. Keep in mind too that Ego himself has asked Isagi to go on and surpass him, so he's doing exactly that. Now, I'm not saying Fox's philosophy will get thrown out the window. We still have a lot of chapters left, so he'll obviously be proven right, and probably for the majority of this game. And he'll be especially important because of his past connection with Ego. They need to address it. And if that's the case, that means we'll be getting more Ego flashbacks and maybe even more God of Football references, which I think will definitely be appearing in this match. Even before the match, we all saw a feather falling before Isagi, and he specifically says if there is a god of football, he's sure they are testing him. So how exactly does the god of football come into play? At first, before I made this theory, I really didn't know, but I think with Isagi's newest philosophy and awakening, it all makes sense on how the god of football will appear, especially if we look at the evidence. However, Isagi updating his philosophy reminds me of the sponsor of today's video, NTE, and their 1.3 update, baby. Neverness to Everness, or NTE, is a free-to-play open-world RPG game, and it's dropping one of its newest updates, the 1.3 Rising from the Moonlit Fog. It's completely revamping the experience by adding new stories, events, maps, and characters like Linko and specifically Zanko, the new addition to the game. Zanko is someone who has many depths to her character, someone who was brought into the criminal organization The Scarlet Letter, desperately wanting to be seen and her existence acknowledged. However, she could never fully define who she was and harbored an obsession towards Daffodil, her older sister who was part of the Scarlet Letter at the time, as Zanko believed she had a good soul. Her obsession was an ultimate quest to validate her own existence. But when that obsession never came to fruition, she chose to define herself as tainted and delivered her final confession amid the destruction. In battle, she treats her enemies' fears and despair as mere playthings, and we can see that in her gameplay as she is a main damage character who powers herself up by doing damage over time. Zanko has two different states that do two different attacks, a reality state and the illusion state, kind of like Itoshi Rin's water mode and destroyer mode, both having its uses and both being deadly. By using her basic attack, she can build up her ultimate meter and unleash her beautiful ultimate Blood Feast Reverie, pressing the ultimate again in a set window to unleash her second ultimate, Inferno Flamenco. On top of that, this update includes their summer skins and summer events. So what are you waiting for? Be sure to play NTE with its newest update, available on all platforms as well as in the description and the pinned comment. Thank you so much for NTE for sponsoring today's video. So the god of football, if we look at the evidence, has a lot of reason to show up in this game. Ego says the god of football appears at the extremity of thought and effort, specifically when mind and body become one. And if you connect the dots with Isagi's newest philosophy and awakening, where he isn't being held back by anything like BLUELOCK, not following ego and becoming one with himself, he fulfills that requirement that ego describes. If what ego said is right, which let's be real, this is the only context we even have for the god of football, it lines up perfectly with Isagi focusing on his own identity. He isn't following the BLUELOCK philosophy anymore. In fact, we see in the same exact chapter, the collar of the chains are open, and then the chains are no longer around Isagi's neck. The only other time we've really seen this is Hiryo breaking his chains when he stops playing for his parents' expectations and starts playing for himself, exactly like how Isagi will play for himself in this game. Again, we can only make assumptions about how the god of football state is achieved through the person that introduced it to us. Isagi's mind and body becoming one with his awakening is setting that up to happen. However, there are two important details and questions you might have. How good will Isagi actually play with this new philosophy and independence? Because what does playing for yourself even mean? And secondly, Isagi's feathers that we saw before the game look different than the god of footballs. Right out of the gate, I do think Isagi will be struggling with this new mentality and identity crisis. I don't think he'll adapt straight away and figure this out. This will be something we see throughout the England game, especially as Teddy and England dominate and kind of prove to Isagi other philosophies, specifically one that doesn't even utilize ego, works well. That's why I think England will be the one leading for most of this game, and with Isagi's back against the wall, his conclusion is to form his new philosophy. Now, of course, Isagi will need help because this mentality isn't something he's used to. I think a few players do come to mind when it comes to helping Isagi, because we know there are bound to be chemical reactions. Isagi can learn to play for himself with others. The most obvious one is Shido, the star striker in the England formation as well, someone who is literally the definition of individuality, freedom, and playing for yourself. This could be how we also get some Shido development. I know a lot of people have been waiting for that. I thought this would happen in the France game, but it makes sense for Shido to get his shine here, especially since he's the only striker at the moment. Keep in mind that Isagi focusing on playing for himself doesn't mean he abandons everyone else. He's just doing what's best for his own self. Football is a sport that's played with 11 players, and the best decision for Isagi in the moment could be a chemical reaction with someone who understands him. And of course, Shido throughout this story has constantly acknowledged Isagi. He meets the requirement of being a player with a strong identity. We've never seen the Isagi and Shido chemical reaction before, and he also needs development this game. I'd be more surprised if we didn't see Shido and Isagi work together. Personally as well, one other chemical reaction that might happen is an egoist 4 chemical reaction. I think everyone would be happy seeing this. They fit the quality of understanding Isagi since they were with him all the way from the start. All of them are not on the pitch as well, so we can get an amazing panel of them subbing in, and also the fact that we haven't seen an egoist 4 chemical reaction yet. Remember, y'all, England is the motherland of football, the origin, where it all began. Of course, it will go to the players that started it all, Kunigami, Chigiri, Bachira, and Isagi. Since the England games theme is about identity, like this whole video has been about Isagi, maybe Kunigami is another player who finds his old hero identity too, possibly with Isagi's help. The more Isagi grows, the more others around him grow, and that's how Isagi will become the center of the team again, by doing the opposite, not caring about BLUELOCK. That way he can highlight his own strength, highlight others' own strengths like Kunigami, becoming a better team player by focusing on himself. The last character is Itoshi Rin, who Isagi stated to be important in this match, which honestly, he faces the same dilemma as Isagi. He relies on Itoshi Sai and Isagi being too influenced by Isagi's ego, which resulted in him getting benched. The problem with Rin is his character flip-flops so much. In the U20 game, it was about crushing himself, and then in the PHG game, it was about Isagi, and then Nigeria, it was about destroying himself, and then the France game, it was Isagi again. So maybe, just maybe, this will be the game where we truly let Rin focus on himself rather than relying on Isagi and Sai again, which is perfect timing because Isagi is having a similar awakening and Sai is joining after this match. This isn't a chemical reaction, but there is a possibility of Isagi finding his identity would help awaken Teddy and his ego. Since we know Fox controls Teddy and this game's theme is about identity, Isagi awakening his opponents to devour them makes absolute sense with everything we said earlier. Maybe his way to beat England is to force them to use their egos. Now, I truly believe that will be what Isagi's development and awakening throughout this game is, and the other important characters he'll work with, but like I brought up earlier, the god of football feathers look different to the one we saw in Ego's backstory. Before the game, we do see feathers, but they were white. They look closer to the goddess of luck feathers we saw in the third selection. Granted, this was a concept made by Ego, but it's a very similar color, and if there's anyone who is blessed by the goddess of luck, it would be Isagi. Maybe replacing the god of football for Isagi will end up being the goddess of luck, but only time will tell. No matter what, I think one or the two of them will definitely make an appearance alongside Isagi's awakening. Anyways though, that wraps up what I think will happen to Isagi during this England match, how the god of football may be involved, and what chemical reactions he'll form in this game. If you took a shot for every time I said awakening or philosophy, I'm sorry, but I truly feel like everything has been pointing narratively towards Isagi winning by himself, becoming a just Isagi Yoichi, and with Ego's description of the god of football too, Isagi seems very, very close to maybe reaching that state. I'm honestly super excited to see the development we'll get for Isagi as well as the other characters I mentioned. It truly feels like this England game could be one of the best if executed properly. Remember though that this is just a theory. Take it all with a grain of salt. We're trying to predict what's going on and not saying everything is gonna happen. If you made it to the end though, thank you so much for watching as always. YouTube really thinks you like this video right here, so be sure to check that one out too. I appreciate y'all so much, and I'll see y'all in the next one.